So I'm really grateful to the previous speakers for setting the stage for me. I'm going to talk about hazardous chemicals in food contact. By this, I mean, again, not only food packaging, but everything that contacts our food. And so you have already heard that there are over 11,000 substances which are listed in regulatory tests and industry inventories for food contact materials. So they could all be added to the food contact materials, and many of these food contact chemicals can migrate into food, often in mixtures, and thus they become food contaminants. They contribute to human exposure. But also, as our keynote speakers, both Linda and Pete, have beautifully shown, we worry about the chemical migration and contamination of food because some food contact chemicals are hazardous and they could cause chronic diseases or contribute to development of toxicity and so on. But the question I want to discuss with you now is, are all hazardous food contact chemicals at the moment adequately assessed and managed? Because, you know, we want to know, is it safe? How is it controlled? And so, what is in the spotlight? What do people always talk about? I mean, you hear the same names over and over again. Bisphenols, phthalates, primary aromatic amines, maybe heavy metals. I'm not saying these are not important. But, you know, what I'm trying to say is that if you put your flashlight somewhere else in this darkness, which is surrounding us with all these chemicals, maybe you see something else which also matters. And in fact, I believe the situation is something more like this. So you've got many more things which we might care about, but we don't know about them. And why is this like this? So already Pete has clearly shown this. There are problems, to call it, you know, slightly, with the current risk assessment paradigm. And I'm just going to give you a few examples specifically for the hazard assessment of food contact chemicals. I mean, first of all, in the current approach, both in Europe and US, everywhere else, more or less, we look at single chemicals. Most of them would be representing the intentionally added substances, which are assessed one at a time. However, you've seen, the reality is that there are multiple food contact chemicals which are present simultaneously, including lots of non-intentionally added substances, many of which we simply don't know. And so the mixture effects of all these exposures at the moment remain unaddressed. And, I mean, here's the table you've seen again, and you see here the examples for some of the chemicals of concern. This is not comprehensive, this is just examples. What I want you to carry back from this is that if you look at plastics on top of the table, you care about both IS and NIS, and there can be many different substances there. But also for paper and board, which many people look at as a bit more pure material. The way it is produced now, you've got problems with IS, like your PFAS, your fluorinated chemicals, fluorescent brighteners, all of these things. You've also got a lot of NIS in paper and board, like, for example, mineral oils, a big issue now in Europe. It's also a big issue in the US, but nobody is talking about this over the ocean. But I'm sure your paper is also having mineral oils in it. You also have a lot of recycling contaminants, such as metals, bisphenols, phthalates, printing inks, remnants, and so on. And if you come to metal and glass, these materials, I mean, the structural material itself, it is actually having some migration issues, but we more or less know which chemicals we should care about there, and we can check them and control them. But as long as you come to organic chemistry in these articles, so for example, organic coating on metal articles or closures in the glass articles, you're again coming back to the synthetic chemistry and all these problems with the unknowns. And the same for the multilayers. If you think about the multilayer, you have to think about all the main structure materials and all the chemicals which could be associated with it. And additionally, you care about chemicals from adhesives, coatings, and so on. So just to summarize this again, we've got a lot of knowledge gaps regarding which chemicals are in plastics, paper and board, multilayers, but also for metals and glass. The material itself is, you know, few to none unknowns, but if you come to organic questions, this is again becoming a problem. But so that's one thing. Lots of chemicals, we don't know which ones are there, which ones are hazardous. But even if you know which chemicals are hazardous, and you're going to test it, although not chemicals are tested, the thing is, the regulatory testing, as Pete has shown this, is prescribed from a rigid and limited set of possibilities. For example, you test for several standard endpoints following standardized methods and concentration ranges. However, we know that there can be multiple effects which can contribute to chronic diseases, and the outcomes of chemicals exposures often depend on exposure timing. And so all of these impacts are often not covered by the standard tests, I mean the regulatory testing, or these tests may also have insufficient sensitivity to detect this. So what do I mean by the standard tests? I mean, you don't have to read this all. There is this globally harmonized system for classification and labeling of chemicals, which regulation is trying to impose all over the world. Well, the thing is, it does test for a lot of endpoints, so you kind of get a feeling, oh, it's been tested for everything, it's safe. But the thing is, if you think about human health relevance of this testing, only maybe the so-called CMR substances, so carcinogenic, mutagenic, reproductively toxic, matter directly for the human health. And you also have below that this target organ systemic toxicity for the single and repeated exposure, which could also maybe catch some effects which interest us. But the point is that one of the deficiencies of the current testing paradigm is that many of these tests are actually very insensitive. So the regulated testing continues to use like light microscopy and gross pathology designed in the end of 70s, 80s. Although the science has already moved forward, we have advanced scientific imaging and testing methods which are actually not used in regulated testing. You can ask Laura Vandenberg, and I'm sure you'll hear about this later on today. We also have insufficiently covered hazards. We now know much more about what chemicals can do, but we are not testing for this on a regular basis. We don't test for endocrine disruption on a regular basis. We don't look at metabolic disruption, behavioral effects like autism or learning and memory deficits, many other problems with many other organs and physiological systems. Also, persistency and bioaccumulative properties are not being routinely assessed by the regulatory testing. And the last thing with the deficiencies of current testing is that we also have insufficiently covered exposure scenarios, so non-monotonic dose responses are not being looked at. We don't cover sensitive windows of development. Delayed toxicity and multi-generational effects is, a thing of something that is not even being considered, and also the mixture toxicity is very rarely addressed. So, the last thing I want to talk in this short talk today, I've shown you that scientists have achieved much progress revealing how chemical exposure can affect human health. However, regulatory assessment often lags behind the current scientific understanding. So, just to illustrate this on the example of our food contact chemicals database, if you use very conservative assessment to catch the chemicals for which you do have GHS classifications, and you only look here at top hazardous chemicals, meaning for human health that was CMR substances, and for environmental health it was highly acutely and chronically acute and chronic aquatic toxicity, class 1, so the highest substances, you already have 400 chemicals. So remember about our spotlight, and this is the 400 which are officially having the official classifications. You've got 400 chemicals. And if you add EDCs to that, so the endocrine disrupting chemicals, only the ones which have been officially recognized by the last year's WHO report on endocrine disruptors, you already have around 30 unique chemicals more added to this list of potentially highly hazardous chemicals. But these are only the official classifications for which we've been fighting for the last 20 or 25 years. And in fact, probably many of you have heard about the endocrine disruption exchange, the list of potential endocrine disruptors based on scientific publications. This list has now over 300 chemicals, and if you add those ones to intersect them with the food contact chemicals, the number would actually go above 600, I tell you. So, that's just the point. This is what we know from science. This is what is being officially allowed to consider in the regulation. Yeah. So, I hope I was able to convince you that hazard assessment of food contact chemicals needs a totally new approach. And why? Because we've got all these 11,000 substances, plus the NICE, which are not even mentioned around this 11,000, and conservative hazard assessment already highlights over 400 chemicals of potential concern among the substances. It is not possible to assess them one by one by the normal risk assessment, look at exposures, biomonitoring. This task is insurmountable. There is too many of them. And the point is, there can be many more hazardous chemicals which would remain unnoticed and unmanaged because you've got current hazard assessment paradigm has insufficient human health relevance, and it does not incorporate the most recent scientific understanding. Therefore, to ensure food packaging safety, Therefore, to ensure food packaging safety with all these contradictions, we need something new. We need a breakthrough. We cannot rely on the testing methods and management methods which were designed in the 70s, So what we at Food Packaging Forum are actually talking about a lot is that we should fight for putting the public health concerns as drivers for improved testing. So what would this mean to us? First of all, we have to realize that people are exposed not to single chemicals, but to mixtures. So we propose to test overall extracts or migrates from finished food contact articles to capture mixture toxicity. That would mean you take your article, you take your food processing equipment, you extract it, or you simulate the migration, you get the mixture of all chemicals which might be released from this article. IS, including NIS, including the unknowns. You've got them all in the mixtures, and these ones you test in your biological tests. And what kind of tests should this be? These should be tests which are relevant to human health. We should focus on endpoints or tests which are relevant for prediction of chronic diseases, of contribution of chemicals to chronic diseases prevalent in exposed populations. So, that's our vision. That's what we are hoping to see in our lifetime. Yes? No? Jane? And thank you for your attention.